Hello, friends. I'm Wendy Joe, and this is the Grow podcast. And I'm here with my friend Ashley. How are you doing this week, Ashley?
I am doing amazing. I feel good. I feel great. I feel energized. How about you?
Nice. You look radiant. I'm feeling
Oh,
good.
thank
I'm
you.
feeling good. Getting through the hot summer here in Arkansas and looking forward toward fall, actually. But I'm also trying to be in the moment, even though it's hard for me to be outside, which I'm missing.
Yeah.
There's nothing like getting outside to refresh yourself, get a little sunshine. So I'm just stealing little
Mhm.
pockets of that when it's in the evening and not too hot.
Yeah. So one thing I like to do in the evening time, it seems a little weird, but I do it anyway. I'll sit outside on the porch after the sun is set
Hmm. Nice.
just to get the
Yeah.
cooler weather.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a little quieter too. So this week we're
Mhm.
talking about shadow work, the shadow self, inner child. It's a pretty heavy topic, but one that I think is really important. I think sometimes people think it's a little woo woo, or really you want me to connect with my inner child, or but if you kind of step back from that a little bit and really look at it as reflecting and figuring out who your authentic self is, then I think it becomes clear that it's really vital, to people's life and growth. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think it's an important part in being able to grow because there's a time frame, and we might have talked about it in one of the previous episodes, but there's a time frame where we're not conscious. Like we're receiving a lot of downloads. People are giving us our existence, our foundational way of being that we have no control over. And for some of us, it's sourced in trauma. For some of us, it's painful, it hurts, those kind of things. And we don't get the opportunity or we can't create the space to deal with it. And so as we mature and evolve, you will start to see certain patterns arise. And usually those patterns are sourced in those childhood experiences that we had. So being able to just, say, it's okay, you're safe, and letting your subconscious or your inner child know that, I think is so important for growth. So I think it's
Yeah.
an important topic as well.
Yeah. And you brought up a lot of good points there. So one of the things that I don't think people realize is, you know, most children suffer some type of trauma, from the mildest thing like misunderstanding situations because they can't look at it from an adult perspective. Their mind doesn't have enough experience to process it, right? To abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, whatever it happens to be. um, and what happens to your mind is, it can't accept this information. It doesn't understand it, right? So you have this wonderful shadow self that kind of steps in and takes the brunt of it, right? But then it also takes the memory, right? So you don't remember some of it, or you just remember parts of it. Um, so everyone to one degree or another has this, right? And so where is the authentic self in all this? And so if you start to understand this, you realize that the only path to get to be who you really are, who you're really meant to be, is through, looking at these pieces and putting yourself together. That's
Yeah.
how, that's the only way I can explain kind of the process that I went through, and if I'm coaching someone, what I would help them to go through. I mean, it really, as a spiritual coach, you're assisting someone to do their own work.
Having a coach is important because, or having somebody to mirror you is important because sometimes those blind spots show up because they're so deep within your psyche, is so deep within. And being able, and on top of that, it's scary. So even if it is a situation where you may have experienced a misunderstanding, it still feels scary to this day. And so being able to bring those up to the forefront and have some of those conversations to address it with somebody supporting you is extremely therapeutic, and is reassurance that it doesn't have to be so scary.
Right. I agree totally. Because
Yeah.
the fear just creates fight or flight, which
Yeah.
can create anxiety, PTSD. It's all, from these things that mostly that we just don't understand or haven't pieced together all the parts, because our shadow self, or I like to call it the chameleon self, because
Yeah.
it adapts to every situation, right? Um,
Yes. It does.
yeah.
And it
Uh,
requires you to be mindful when it's showing up, because it might look a little different, but the
mhm.
essence of it is still, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with that.
Yeah. It's still that it's right. You're adapting. So you're not who you really are. You can't possibly respond and know even who you really are, so
Mm-hmm.
by taking each piece out and looking at it, and it can be a hard process, and I think people, again, the fear starts coming up and they just don't want to do it. But man, don't you think
Yeah.
it's so much better on the other side of really starting to dig deep and uncover these things and put yourself together, you know?
I wouldn't have it any other way. Like if I had to go back 5, 7 years ago, that person was miserable. She was so sad. She was so responsive. Like I don't really, I think I dealt with her because that's who I was given, but that person is not somebody that I would aspire to be. And so,
Mhm.
even though some of the times that I have, even currently, are difficult, one thing that I know for a fact is that I'm moving, one, in purpose, and two, in authenticity. So when I show up, you get what you get, and when shadow starts to present itself, or inner child starts to present herself, we got to have a conversation. We know what's up.
Yeah.
We gonna deal with this, we'll address it. So yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. I feel bad for anybody who hasn't gone through that process at least once.
Right. And as you mentioned, it's ongoing, right? It's not like, oh, I'm gonna fix this and really tend to it and then I'll be done. No, it's a journey, and that's okay.
Yeah,
Relax into the journey, and as you understand yourself, hopefully when you get to be a little bit older, you'll have already done all that work and your life will feel so much lighter and happier.
for sure. And I also want to say I'm really excited that you got a chance to meet Sharetta in this interview coming up, because she is a member of the Highline tribe and we have worked together for a really long time. So I'm really excited to bring her to this podcast to be able to meet you. And I'm excited for the conversation moving forward.
Yes, I think everyone's going to enjoy it. And it was my pleasure to interview her and share ideas. And so, coming up next, my interview with Sharetta. Hey there, Wendy Joe with the Grow podcast. So, today we're talking about shadow work or inner child work. And you can't talk about that without thinking about your shadow self, the self that was born out of trauma and pain, or even simple misunderstandings when you were a child. The shadow self, or chameleon self as I like to call it, takes the brunt of all that pain. And then later in life, if you don't sort of leave it behind, it can really get in the way, and your fear and negative emotions can start to take over because the shadow self or the chameleon self is in charge. So I remember when I was working with a healer and they asked me to create a picture of my shadow self, and I did. It was really a cool exercise, and it turned out to be this big lumbering dinosaur-like character. And the best part was I kind of got a picture of it in my mind's eye. So as I go through healing work, if my chameleon self or shadow self comes up, I get that picture in my mind's eye and I kind of just send it away. You can't make friends with it. You got to send it away and figure out who you are, who is your true self. Joining me now is Sharetta, also known as Black Butterfly Oshun. Sharetta accepted her call to spirituality from her ancestors. She's a medium, conjure, and divination specialist. Welcome to the show, Sharetta.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm really glad you're here. This is kind of a heavy topic today. We're talking about shadow work or inner child work, whatever you want to call it. But it's really important work also. So I'm really glad that we're going to talk about this subject. So tell me what's meant by shadow work.
So when I think of shadow work, I think of um, like things that we have put a mask over and pushed it back into the back, like a shadow. As you walk, you can see your shadow on the side of you, but the shadows are things that are in our peripheral that we just don't want to deal with it. They're in the peripheral or in the back of us.
I relate to this a lot. When I was about 30, I met a healer who really helped me. I spent the next 10 years really looking at everything that was in the shadow, or not everything. I thought it was everything, but unfortunately, there's always still some pieces, it seems like. So, what are your thoughts about that? Is it a journey? I think people get a little nervous about what am I going to find in those shadows, and so and how long is this going to take? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, my thoughts about that is like the journey itself. When you start the journey, it's like I give the people analogy like an onion. As you pull layers back, you have to pull them back. And yeah, you're going to cry as you pull the layers back and
Mm-hmm.
you have to deal with it. And at one point, you're going to be like, okay, let me stop because it's just burning too bad. But then you get the muster, the courage to go and move forward. And to me, like, I don't put a time frame on it because everybody's journey is different. Like
Mm-hmm.
some people will bring up something and they just don't want to acknowledge it at that time. And the longer it takes you to acknowledge it, the more work you're going to have to put in place when it comes to certain parts. And like you said, that you feel like once you do it, it's like other pieces that come. So it's just like when you unlock one piece, you unlock another piece, and then you unlock another piece. And I just feel like your journey never ends until you actually step into the spiritual realm. And from the spiritual realm, that's when you have a different task or purpose. But I believe it's just like you're working your way to get into the higher power and to be your true authentic self.
Right. And so you brought up so many points there, but that last part when you said your true authentic self, I think that's sometimes frightening to people because they've lived in the shadows for such a long time, and that feels easier somehow. Um, but also, I was earlier in the show, I was chatting with Ashley, and I mentioned that I actually call the shadow self the chameleon self because your
Yeah.
chameleon, it changes with who you're with, what your situation is. And I feel like it's really based in the fact usually that you haven't cleared those things that are in the shadows. So you change and you're not your authentic self. And it's such a different world going through that, coming out the other side and realizing who you are. Have you had that experience also?
I have had that experience and I'm currently still dealing with that experience. But I say I've like you said before, when you got into your 30s, that's when found a spiritual healer. And for me, it's partly in my 30s too. I'm close to
Mhm.
hitting 40, but it was something that I just realized, that church wasn't doing it anymore. And having my experiences and being able to talk with others who couldn't understand. And like you said, you do put like you said, the chameleon analogy is really good because it's like you put a camouflage on. It's
Mhm.
like basically you adapt to whatever environment you are in and you adapt to that and just put that mask up. And that's what I was doing. I had a actual block up. I will only let you come in but so much. And if I felt like you were coming in too close, I would deter it somewhere else, and how I was dealing with that. And right now, I am actually taking this time out that we're dealing with the Lion Gate portal and all these retrogrades that we have going on. I am actually being quiet and sitting still because I am on the go so much that I realize that I don't take time out for myself. Yeah, I do my self-care, but taking time out for myself to declutter my mind.
Mhm.
And so I am actually going through another phase of my shadow work where I am actually understanding that just because someone else said that what I was doing, that I couldn't do it, or that was impossible, or they didn't believe in it, doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to achieve it. So I had to step out of that realm and that box of understanding that because what was said, or this person didn't see my vision because they didn't read my business plan,
Mhm.
to fully understand. So it showed me how much you value me. But then I
Mhm.
know that I value myself more. So those who are in my inner circle, if they get me and understand my vision, especially like my husband, it makes me feel good because you get where I'm going. So
Right.
now it feels like, okay, I don't need anybody else's opinion in the world, long as my spouse and my immediate family and my children understand what I'm doing and where I'm going.
Right.
And
You started to really know yourself, it sounds like. And when you
I,
start to know yourself, you don't, it's not that it's not that you don't can't listen to others' opinions, but what you think in a moment is the most important thing. And I think that when people learn to be their authentic self, that's realized. Um, so uh, another thing that you mentioned about being close to 40 and starting in your 30s, these are open windows, I feel, for spirituality, right on the decades, around 30, around 40, around 50. Those are three really good opportunities to start this growth process. Um, and it sounds like that's what you've been doing. I mentioned at the beginning that you're a medium and a conjure, and divination is one of the things that you do. Do you also intertwine this shadow work with those gifts?
yes, I do. I do intertwine shadow work because at one point of time when I was going through, it was like the darkest part of my life. And I was like, I am not going to pay you to tell me what I need to do for myself. And you're asking me to pay how much? No, I'm going to go in and I'm going to dig in and, do this myself. So with me doing the work and the spiritual work that I do, I actually hit on some points with people when I get permission to do these services for them. And
Mhm.
I pinpoint and be like, look, we got to get to the root of the issue.
Mhm.
And that way we get to the root, everything will start to actually transpire in a forward motion for you. And
Yes.
and I do that because I feel like you can come get all the readings and all the divinations that you want, but if you are not healing yourself, any and everything that I say, or if I tell you to do something, you're not going to do it. Why? Because you're not putting in the work.
Mhm.
It's just like free information
Mhm.
handed to you.
Right. And also, that shadow self or chameleon self steps right in to block you. You have to do that deep work. We have to underline what you just talked about for everyone because it's so true. I have people who come to me very often for readings, reading after reading, and that's fine. They can gain some insight and information, but every time I mention that if they want to go deeper, they want to really look at their childhood, at what is driving them, at what is blocking them, you have to dig deep. So you have really hit the nail on the head, and people are really fortunate to work with you because you understand that.
Yes, thank you. And with the inner child too, it also it ties into the ancestral healing as well.
Mhm.
Because a lot of times our traumas are traumas that either was in the DNA, was during the time of conception, or when we was being carried in throughout our childhood.
Mhm.
So I have come to the root of certain cycles happen over and over and over again.
Mhm.
And you can be like, oh, I'm going to stop it today, but you still got to get to the root of the problem.
Mhm.
Like, you know, how they say, like, sometimes your parents, your first bully were your parents.
Mm.
And I had to really sit back and deal with that as a parent. because I had to understand that things that happen with my parents or other people's parents and they didn't know how to handle or control,
Mhm.
they tried to control with their own kids and stuff, not knowing that it was a toxic way of handling things, like with my kids, if my kids are upset and they're crying, I do not ask them, da 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 da, or be quiet. I'm like, we're gonna process this. Or if you're
Mhm.
angry and you're doing this, okay, we're not gonna hit, but we're gonna figure out why are we being angry. And I had to change my mannerism because my kids are following me. I was angry, so I was snappy. I was doing this.
Mhm.
And then I had to learn too, sometimes people who hurt your feelings or say something, instead of turning the other cheek like we've been taught, or let them talk or whatever. No, if somebody hurts your feelings or say something that hurts your feelings, you need to say something. We always had the thing where we would say, stick and stones make break my
Right.
bone, but words will never hurt me.
Mhm.
That is a lie, because words do hurt a lot of
They
people.
do. They're far reaching. People remember them in the weirdest ways in a dream or when they're feeling anxious and they start playing the tapes in their head. They are really powerful and we need to be intentional. And I think you brought up another good point. When we have children, I feel if we're really doing it the way intended, we really have to face ourselves in order to do a good job. And we start to remember how we were treated as children. It brings up so many things.
Yeah.
And for even from being kind of stuck and attached to this person who's dependent on you, if you've suffered trauma, that can be really difficult. So I think it is really important to look at these open windows in the early 30s, early 40s, and take the opportunity, because not only will you benefit, but as you mentioned, the ancestral trauma can start to heal too. So how can people get started, do you think? It probably, to someone who's never done this kind of work, it may sound really daunting to even think about, right? So how can someone get started?
Write down the good things about yourself and the bad things that you think, and things that you think people have said about you. And you kind of sit with those and sit with those thoughts. And then you actually be with self and process it, and you journal. Journaling is a big thing, because journaling helps you get out everything that you're trying to say. Even if you're crying and you're journaling, it helps because you are releasing. A lot of times our shadow is stuck there. It's because we haven't released.
Mhm.
And it's like, basically, we have to go in and but you have to acknowledge it first, because you can't write about it and you're not acknowledging it, because it's just like you're just writing it down just to write thoughts down, and that's it. And it's going to be stagnant. So
Mhm.
you have to acknowledge it. Like they always say, if you can acknowledge it, if there was a situation or there was a incident that happened and the incident blew up from whatever it was, there is, I say, it's three sides to the story. Okay. Yours, theirs, and the truth.
Mhm.
But you also got to acknowledge your part in it, because so many people try to play victim so much. You can't sit there and be the victim, because at some point you got to be like, okay, I did act like this. And then you have to ask yourself, why did I act like this?
Mhm.
And when you say why, because I felt like this, but why did you feel like this? And you got to keep asking yourself why, to actually dig, like pulling the onion back again.
Mhm.
Because if you really go back to why do you feel like you have to overtalk people, or why do you have to feel like you have to scream out what you're saying, is if you go back to your childhood and they say, children are not supposed to be heard nor seen, then that
Mhm.
creates a problem where you do something because you always want to be seen, whether it's something good or bad. Most of the time it's bad,
Right.
because you want to be seen, or you could not talk as a child, so your voice is what you be like, and it's like, no, just calm it down. Yeah.
Right, right. I understand. Yeah, that sounds like a great starting point too. Writing down the things that have bothered you, starting to journal about your thoughts. You're opening the window just a little more and taking a look inside. Well, this has been such a great discussion. I could probably talk to you all day. How can people get in touch with you if they're interested in the work you're doing?
Okay, so you may get in touch with me through my social media pages. I have my social media page. It's called Black Butterfly Oshun, and you can get in touch with me there. You can actually send me a message, and then there I have an actual link where it links you to my websites. So you can contact me there through my website. I am also on Twitter platform. I come every now and then. I put out some messages. I give some, affirmations. So those are
Nice.
platforms where you can definitely find me at.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Wendy. This was my pleasure, and I thank you very much.
Hey there, Wendy Joe, co host of the Grow podcast. Also, Wendy Edge, occupational therapist. And I wanted to tell you about my new business where I'm combining the principles of occupational therapy, coaching, and spirituality and wellness, of course. On the website, you'll see that I'm doing Osho Zen card readings, spiritual coaching, spirit paintings, and so much more. So if you want, check it out, edgecoachingandconsulting.com.
Have you heard of the Cannabis Nursing School? It's a place where cannabis nursing, entrepreneurship, and spirituality meet. The High Align Tribe is waiting for you, and it's so easy to find. CannabisNursingSchool.com.
And we're back. What a great interview.
You did such a good job. It was
Oh,
great.
thank you. Well, she really had so much depth and so much to offer. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. And the last part, we didn't have enough time to really delve too deeply into it, but talking about generational trauma, I think that's really important, and it's a piece of trauma that many people don't acknowledge. I'm not sure why. I know. What are your thoughts on generational trauma?
Well, I think some of the generational trauma, well, one, we don't have control over the generational trauma. So generally we'll shy away from anything that we don't have control over. Like it's already painful to deal with the stuff you could have controlled. It's like, oh man, I'll be accountable for the part that I didn't do or did do. But I think with generational trauma, that there's a lot of history there that goes into why that experience has been carried forward generationally. And especially when we're talking about in the US, all the different populations of people who have been, essentially targeted over the past 100 years. And so, and those conversations are just generally difficult to have. And as long as we're not willing to have it, we're always going to have that, the generational source of, either envy or jealousy or fear that's attached to it. And the longer that we're not willing to have those conversations, the longer that will kind of continue to perpetuate certain behaviors, actions collectively. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that what we carry to our own children and family members, we're just, there's no way to break it up except to tackle it head on and make that a part of, removing as much of that shadow self as possible through this type of work. So when you delve into the work, there's your own life to deal with, but there is still all that came before you and
Yeah.
has impacted your life. And, I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I really appreciate this conversation. I know that inner child work isn't necessarily my specialty. I know what I've done for myself to help heal myself as far as dealing with, where I've come from, the environment that I grew up in, but, being able to share it with the world so that way they can begin just even simply asking themselves the question, why is this behavior like this? Why do I feel this way about that? I think approaching shadow with a spirit of inquiry, it'll do wonders just on perspective.
Absolutely agree. All right. Well, get to work, everyone. And we hope you have a great week. Bye.
Bye.